Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast. This is your hot takes. This is the second time we've run this different format. In this format, rather than the sort of pod quest that I usually do, what we're going to do is we're going to explore a particular topical topic in the world of game development. And we'll talk through our understanding of that space and what the possibilities are. And at the end of it, we'll take our hot take on what we think is the best way forward for people to use that lesson. And today, that topic is going to be all about early access. Now, obviously, I need to introduce the other participants in this. And as is tradition, I'm going to introduce Laura. Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hiya. My name is Laura Donahue. I'm a senior researcher with Sutherland Labs, do user experience research and games research. Been in the field for about 5 years now. And you may also see my sidekick, researcher Carl, the orange cat. He's currently sitting right in front of me, but I think he's like just out of frame. So if you see an orange fuzzball, it's just Carl. He's fine.
It's all good. Thank you for that. And Stuart, tell us all about. I mean, we all know who you are, but let's just get people to
let's pretend.
Yeah, let's
that
pretend.
New listening to the podcast.
Well, you keep changing your look, so maybe we do need to tell people.
That's true. Bearded, long haired, short head.
I'd say the cap is incognito, but it does have the logo right on there, so it's kind of mixed message.
Hats are needed. I think hats are essential.
Essentially, I am Stuart DeVille, founder of Game Dev Local, and I do. I wear many hats. I do many things, and if you want to know more about that, just find me online.
Great. And for those who don't know, I'm Oscar Clark. I've been around in the industry since 1998. Yes, I'm that old. And I talk about a lot of things, including live ops, monetization design, and I do a lot of work consulting and supporting and helping marketing, all sorts of things related to games. So, without further ado, as I said, the topic we're going to talk about is early access. And as is traditional, given that we have the 3 stages of development expertise, I'm going to start with Laura, because you're coming from it relatively new and also coming from this research history. What do you think of when you hear the phrase early access?
What do I think? I mean, there are a lot of different things that you can think of. Mostly, a game that is being put in front of players early, right? So it's not finished yet. It's a game at at least a playable stage, and has various levels of like doneness. And definitely seen a trend at like what types of games tend to be early access and which ones not. We can kind of get into that later, but plain simple, Webster's Dictionary, just not finished yet, but players are playing it.
Just not finished yet. I think that's not a bad summary. Out of interest, do you think you should be paying for a game that's in early access or not?
I think it depends, especially when you start using terms like beta, alpha, open beta, play testing, play testers, feedback. So I have a lot of different feelings on that, though.
We have many thoughts.
We can go down the line.
Good. It's all good. At least you didn't use my least favorite phrase, the vertical slice, but that's another subject for another time.
Oh, Stuart, that's a whole other thing. Yeah,
that's a whole other thing. Stuart, what about you? What for you is early access?
I mean, Laura pretty much nailed it there. It's a game at a stage at which, for different studios, we do early access for different reasons. Some studios do it because they're in a position where they need to make some serious decisions, and early access allows them to get a take on what the audience thinks of where they're at and whether or not they're in the right place. Because it's kind of like if you're not at that point, it's kind of your last chance to make sure that you tidy it up and prepare for release. I'm aware that some studios have actually done it with a small monetary tag on it to support extending their production timeline because their runway has ended. But those tend to be the serious cases, and it takes a lot for a developer to go down that path. You kind of need to be in hot water if you're doing that.
So I'm a little bit of a maverick here, it seems. So for
Okay.
me, early access is nothing to do necessarily with a nearly finished game. I mean, it is. I mean, obviously, you've got to have it good enough to share. But actually, I want to release the game early. So early. In fact, my view is if you don't use early access, so if you don't feel uncomfortable going into early access, you're doing it too late.
Oh, okay.
The reason being is I'm very much in favour of creating experiences that are based around what players actually enjoy. And you can't know that for certain without doing testing.
Yeah.
And so for me, I want to get early access out long before, and there's risks with this, by the way. I'll explain some of them, but I literally want to get the game into early access as soon as I've got more than a couple of hours worth of play. And the reason being is because I'm going to need to be able to test that I'm making the right game.
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind, at this stage, you're never going to be charging people for a game that early. That would be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But you do want to establish that this thing might be worth something at some point, and that's whether that's in game or whether that's pay up front, doesn't matter. You got to know something about the direction you're going in at least. But for me, it's about testing. And what I mean by that is I will do a very, very low spend marketing push on maybe Meta or on maybe TikTok, maybe on Google Ads. Google Ads tends to be the most effective. And I will try to get maybe 100 people. No more than that. Unfortunately, I can't do that with on Steam. There's a beta approach, and on Android there's again similarly an open testing and a closed testing approach. Both of those mechanisms require the player to agree to testing, and I understand why that's there. But what that does is it completely destroys the data because you've now introduced a non-real burden. So this is the challenge. I think early access can be different things to different people. I'm going very, very early. I'm using it as an experience to bring people in to help make sure that the game experience is good enough and that I'm making the right game experience. There are risks with that. Let's go into what you guys, how you guys feel. So obviously with Laura, let's go back to you. With you, where you were saying that the game is nearly ready. What's the sort of benefits and risks from that kind of approach?
I think there are two sides in that one. I think it really depends on what the messaging is around, your early access game, and what kind of promises you're making to players.
Absolutely.
Once that's released, right? Whether if it's, we promise that we're going to add, X, Y, and Z, or oh well, there might be like some bugs, but it's more or less playable. And setting those player expectations is super important, especially for early access. And I think nowadays there is usually a cost associated with it. It usually is some sort of discount than what the full price game would be. But I mean, I know a lot of folks who just don't buy early access games,
Yeah.
because they've read, this and that article.
So many horror stories.
Yeah, so many horror stories of like, just like over promise, under deliver, or it was really buggy. And then sometimes where they're like, this is where we're at, maybe there'll be more. Um, and it might not come quickly, but we're passionate about this, and I've certainly like played games like that before, and I've like gone in with those expectations of like, I this is going to be enough for me, like what's here now is like, that's fine, you know. And then I think using it as a tool for player research, I think is like, I don't know. I'm a little torn about it because on the one hand, especially for like smaller studios, it is really difficult to have like, formal play tests. And you're absolutely right. There is a level of, um, they're manufactured. It is a slightly like manufactured scenario. But at the same time, their players are contributing. and it is work effectively. So I think some form of like formalization of and like reciprocity needs to be a part of the process. Sorry, I talked for a very long time.
No, not at all.
Thoughts?
I think reciprocity is a fantastic point. And actually, again, I think this comes down to transparency. So you tell people what they're getting and you give it to them. You don't like do it in half measures. I think that's generosity at this stage is so important, because at the end of the day, like you say, you're asking for people to do something, even if you're taking, the sort of the less risky approach of putting a game that's nearly ready. I think there's definitely even that still requires that level of generosity and trust building. At the end of the day, Stuart, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think there's for me there's a couple of interesting points here. So one is that like when I speak to studios or indies that are looking to do this kind of stuff or not do this kind of stuff, actually not specifically, they often talk about this whole fear of it, like you only get to make a first impression once,
Yep.
and you don't want to alienate a whole bunch of people from your game because you're giving it to them early, even if you tell them you're giving it to them early. And some people will play that early bit, and then it doesn't leave them with any drive to play the full thing once that comes out. So that's a consideration. But also for me, it's interesting because especially these days, I now consider getting the game in front of people something that I do long before I would reach a point that I would call early access. So the one of the games that I'm working on right now, it's already been in the hands of players at like small indie showcases, and we got like some really powerful feedback from that direct viewing of those players. And it completely reshaped what we were building because we were fairly confident. We'd made a whole bunch of assumptions. We made something really solid. Everyone really liked it. But what we want is for everyone to really love it, to like just want to be obsessed with it. So it was really important for us to get all of that early testing done. Realistically, from where we are now, we might even go through that process again. We're like really far out from anything that I would call early access. And I don't know now if I would entertain doing early access unless I had, I don't know, I think it would have to be something.
It's a scary approach. Yeah.
It would have to be something that I think almost that I would be in a bit of a corner. So like that situation where I've run out of runway, and in order to get the rest of the development done, I either need to get people playing it, maybe as a way of like enticing an investor and being like, look, there's a whole bunch of people that play this and love it, and they really want it, but we need like X amount of cash in order to do that. Or maybe even do that with like I don't know.
No. Yeah. So I come at it completely differently, obviously.
Yeah.
So I will, just for clarity, I will have usually run at what I call an NPS test. So that's where you're using the kind of research that I think, Nora, you would do in house, but we're doing it with teams like Antidote or Playtest Cloud, where you're recruiting people online, they're playing the game through, we're getting some gameplay recording of that, and we're making sure we've got a sanity check level, that there is a reasonable experience there. And then obviously what we're doing is we're saying this is being tested. We'd love to see what your feedback is. We're making sure we're clear about that. But there's an interesting thing, which is we have seen the power of getting people to naturally get into the game, and by really spending tiny amounts of marketing budget to recruit small numbers of people, it's been incredibly good because it doesn't burn the audience. It's kind of you get a few people coming in, but you haven't burned that halo effect that you described that happens when you do that launch, that opportunity for a first impression.
I do also think that you like, yes, there is like, you can have that fear, but I do think like in the long run, the volume of people that will see your game for the first time will phenomenally ultimately outnumber that small number of people that you tested on. And
Yeah.
yes, that might be like it would just be it's every choice that we make is one of these like, well, here's the consideration if we do that, right? And
Yeah.
I just think that's just one of those.
And this is a terribly difficult thing. So again, there is a genuine issue of things like if your game has been on early access too long. So
Yeah.
you've got to. I think one of the things we found, which was sometimes this works, sometimes it hasn't. But the key thing is the ability for the development team to rapidly progress on a repeatedly predictable, safe level. That's a massively important part of this kind of strategy,
Right.
and not every team can do that. I'm of the belief that if you haven't updated the game every month, at minimum, you're not going to have people trust you that you're really investing in that game. If the game has sat there for 2 years without seeing an update, you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the thing for me is that there are risks with it. It's not for everybody, but there are massive benefits if you use if you understand the place that early access offers you, because you have none of the barriers to entry to experience the game that would artificially be there if you use more traditional testing processes. That doesn't mean those other testing processes don't have value. For example, there's one game we're looking at right now. It's not ready for early access, so we are going to use in this case it's a mobile game. We are going to use the beta, the open testing on Android, and just bite the bullet. We can still get a cost per cost per click. So how interested are people in the game? But we can't rely on that delivering us an indication of cost per install, which is a massively important piece of data. But those that do play, we can still get some sense of retention off the back of that. And even if not retention, just the fact that we can get some sort of level of onboarding processes. It means that we can use different recruiting mindsets and strategies to get people who are very much aware that's an open test. And it's really, it might still be very early, but at least we can get some indication of how engaging the game is at that time. So when that game is ready and more solid and suitable to go to open, we've already built up a batch of people who have awareness of the idea. Hopefully then when they see that fulfilled, they'll be more interested in engaging with the game. But like you say, because we've kept the spend low, we can reach even further.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree. And just to build off of Stuart's point, that I mean, of course, hopefully, when it's launched, more than 10 or 100 people that you tested with will purchase and play it. And the most likelihood that will probably happen. But that's not, again, like, that's not to say that, if you only have a few people, test your game, then is that really going to be representative of, like, all of the gamers that exist in all of existence, right? And there's that debate of, do you need like statistical significance and sampling,
exactly.
20 independent variables and whatnot. I was like in like academic research and many, many moons ago and like struggle with this. But honestly, once you and the nice thing, there are two nice things, like to compare it with, playtesting early access, which again, I think are like different things. But the playtesting, you're able to be more targeted with, what you're interested in learning about, who you're interested in learning from. Whereas with early access, again, you will get loads of data. It'll be coming from every which way, from different channels, unfiltered, but also self-filtered in a way, because only people with strong enough opinions are going to tell you, what their feedback is.
Yeah.
So, you definitely, and I think we all agree on this, like, early access is not the time to do your playtesting. Like, that needs to be done beforehand.
Not your basic playtesting, no. I mean, I find that I find you're always doing some level of playtesting, even if it's just an A/B thing. One thing I chuck at you there is that I think one of the other things that we probably should have said is that we always make sure that there's analytics in the game. So I need to be able to track user behavior This is, by the way, all anonymized. For those of you who don't know, I did the best practice advice for the Information Commission Office for the Age Appropriate Design Code. So it really matters to me that you provide authentic and ethical kind of data capture that is useful to improve the game, but cannot be reverse engineered to identify anybody.
Right.
And I think that's absolutely important. To have that level of trust and privacy is massively important. But if we create sensible systems, we can actually track your average person or a person of a particular style of play or a cohort to be able to see what does that type of person on average do. And then we can see where are the places where they drop out, where are the places where they have frustration, where are the places where they seem to have the correct response in the sense of the response we were intending, and what are the motivations through what we see them actually doing that keeps them staying or means that they quit. And I think that so basically moving from the play testing, user testing, qualitative understanding of what's going on, and moving into the more quantitative, measurable data. Again, it's come out of the mobile space, but I've been using it really effectively in the PC space. It's actually very difficult, or I would say almost impossible to do on console, however.
Ooh, very exciting. Might need to have a whole nother episode about this, but I'll just very clumsily plug the data analytics episode that I actually recorded with Steve Stops from Excalibur Games.
Oh, Steve's great.
Which was super interesting, and he explains it really well in a very accessible way. Because I don't know other than the general theory of data analytics, but he explains it super duper well. Definitely recommend it.
No, Steve's
and
great.
Yay, privacy. Yeah.
But another thing, Steve, I need to catch up with Steve, because one thing he did a really interesting bit of data on was, and this is a bit of a tangent, so he did some work when they analysed the use of a particular game design on a mobile phone, portrait versus landscape. And he had some great data to show just how limiting it was if you had a landscape play mode rather than the portrait one. Portrait is so much more natural. But how would he know that? Because he's got in-game analytics.
Data.
We love data. Sorry, this is going to be a running theme for all of these hot takes. Data. We love it. Cool. Stuart, what about yourself? In terms of this sort of, you've got these two data nerds sitting next to you, going, all about kind of analytics, qualitative, quantitative. When you're looking at your early access, is that the stuff you're looking at, or are you just trying to make sure you've got proof that the game is ready?
For me, it would definitely be more about the game is ready. Because I am still a data nerd. I'm not as big a data nerd as you guys.
You can join the Data Nerd Club.
Yeah.
We're not.
You're welcome. We're a broad church.
We need to be strong in numbers.
Yeah, right. At the end of last year, I got my UX design certificate for. So that's
you're more qualified than me. I just learned on the job.
It's more research, and it's not.
Yeah.
It covered everything, but so I plus with my skill set being now insanely broad across games, I tend to, with most things, have a top level, high level kind of overview of these things. Especially, I think for indies, a lot of indies just don't do research, and we need to change that. But I think what indies need to realize is that there is a certain amount of research that you can do that is enough. You can get enough information. You don't need to spend an inordinate amount of time. You don't need to look at inordinate amounts of data. You can do, especially once you've made some assumptions and you're trying to test whether those assumptions are right. It becomes a lot easier for you to pinpoint what it is you want to get data on, what it is you want to figure out. For me, I test early and often. That's why we took what was essentially a prototype to the first showcase, And then we did some work. I think we did 3 or 4 showcases in the space of like 6 months, maybe. And there was iteration between each showcase.
Damn, nice.
Yeah, not massive changes, but definitely like from the first one. Well, the first one, it was like kind of prototyping, so there was like little bugs. And in fact, I think we reported those and had those fixed by the end of the first day of the showcase. So even during a showcase, we were fixing it up and polishing it out. But like I say, that then became like our first playable demo, a solid, stable build. And then we did like one more showcase, and then we took a break. It was kind of serendipitous that like the 3 founders got really busy, but it meant that we had this kind of like forced break, and then during that break we surveyed the audience. We've got like a small following, so we asked them kindly if they would fill out some information. And it basically took everything that we already knew about what we had, all of the information that we had from the people that had talked about, that played the game and what their feedback was. And then what we were looking for was where that kind of overlapped with what the audience of the genre wants and what they feel is missing and all of this kind of stuff. And so we had a meeting, 3 of us got together, and we went into that meeting fully prepared to be like, we might need to start from scratch. We might need to completely pivot. But fortunately, most of those early assumptions were fairly solid, and we just needed to make some adjustments. So yeah, hopefully by the time we get to a point where we would be looking at early access, it should be like real fine detail kind of stuff that we'll be looking for.
It's interesting because I think so. We try to encourage developers, dev teams to think about test-based development. So basically, each release has a KPI associated with it, tested against live audiences, live players. Now, obviously, you got to make sure that it's good enough to release, and you treat it as if it is live from the moment you go into early access. But for me, that idea of driving everything based on do we make the KPIs or not, and to me, it's the scientific method. The scientific method is that it's not just that we make a hypothesis and we see where we go, but what we should be doing is trying to prove that we're wrong.
Yeah.
Now, I am terrible at that because I want to discover why, and it's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit kind of like, I mean, like Laura said, good enough is good enough. And doing in-event showing people the game, it has its values. But I get nervous about those things because I know the effect of bias. We had this happen for us 2 ways. We had a game based on the Rocky Horror Show. It was a musical dance game, rhythm action dance game, and the feedback we had in person was fantastic, and the game did not work. And it turned out it was because there was an issue. Well, a couple of issues, but one of the issues was the timing was slightly off, so that anyone who's relatively musical wouldn't notice and would just do it, and everything would be fine. But if you weren't musical, you just couldn't follow. If we'd had anonymized data testing on that, we would have seen the point where people had tried the swipe against the actual point of the music, and therefore why it failed or passed. And we didn't do that. We didn't have the budget at the time. Another example of this was back in the old days of video phones. 3 did all its testing in-house, inside fantastic lab with amazing facilities, and doing a video call was amazing. It was the best thing since sliced bread. And so 3 launched thinking that video calls were the one thing that everybody would be super excited about. Only in reality, you haven't got anyone else who's got a video phone currently, or it's not charged, or you haven't got your makeup on, or you're not fully dressed, and the idea of sitting there and staring at your boss's eyes for half an hour in a meeting, trust me, I did this on a weekly basis, it's very unnerving. So knowing how you frame the thing you test is as important as the testing itself.
Yes, internal and external validity is
Yeah.
so important. And if you're going to have, clean lab conditions in one place and, but you're supposed to, this is something that's used in someone's home, which just looking at my desk right now is not very, well, it's clean, but it's untidy.
So you say.
So let's do a tour right now. No. Um, but and actually this is all making me think of a lot of different things as well, because I think something we haven't talked about yet is actually all sorts of elements, like is it ready? Have we done enough testing already? Like what are the expectations? But actually I'm wondering what you guys think about, are there certain genres where early access works better compared to other genres? Like, would you not consider early access for certain types of games versus other?
I imagine games as a service games do better out of it because players already have a set expectation that this game will be continually updated and changed along the
It all
way.
started with PUBG, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, started with Meridian 59.
Yeah, or maybe
Oh,
way before
yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
hi,
If anyone's going to know.
I'm not a fossil. No,
I'm
kidding.
old. I'm a fossil. Yeah. Meridian 59,
Yeah.
first visual MMO, I believe. I can't remember, but I think it might have been. And yes, I did play it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, obviously, games as a service games. I think I think this is probably why I would be really reluctant to do early access for what is essentially a mystery. It kind of isn't point and click, but yeah, like mystery adventure.
It has like a story, kind of like role playing
Yeah,
game aspects to it. That might be difficult to,
yeah,
kind
like a
of roll it out as it
fairly
goes.
linear narrative. So it'd
Yeah.
be like, yeah. I mean, I think there probably are. Well, there probably definitely is some scenarios where it would be fully beneficial.
And I've just confirmed Meridian 59 was the first 3D massively multiplayer game
Nice.
released in 1996. Wow, I'm old.
I wonder why I didn't remember. I was only 4 then.
I think Stuart, where you were going there, I would put the divider slightly different. I'd word it slightly differently.
Yeah.
But I think it's the same. We end up in the same place, which is it's how complete an experience can you have. I don't mean is it the final complete experience.
Yeah.
I mean, is the thing that you're releasing a sufficient representation of a player experience to be valid? And I think if you take that as a kind of minimum score, then why a lot of games as service type games work is often because they will often have layers. They will often have a core element which allows you to play something, and then they will be evolved and developed over time. But not every game as a service game, I think, can be delivered as a smaller nugget of testable pieces. I think, it's very hard, for example, to release a first-person shooter until you've got enough element. I mean, in the old days, I think you could have got away with it, but the expectations now of a first-person shooter are so immense. I think it'd be hard to get away with releasing with just 2 or 3 maps.
Yeah.
It might be possible, but I mean, don't get me wrong. I think people do early access like that, but there's so much that goes into it. And the issue with MMOs issue with first person shooters, is more about the critical mass part. So having enough players to be able to reflect. So the number of people who need to be online in order to make sure I don't have more than a 30-second wait.
Yeah.
That's actually more important of a problem. So yes, nugget of experience needs to be complete, but also that nugget of experience has to match the player scale. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of different elements that go into it, and again, like those elements of the player experience, differ depending on if it is, like an MMO or a first person shooter or something like that, you need to have a certain number of people on there to feel like, because that is part of the experience, right?
Yeah.
But even thinking about, I don't know, I think about like what would have happened if Stray. I don't think Stray was early access. I think that was released. Was that released all the
I
way?
don't know. I don't remember. I mean, to me, Stray was just the perfect demonstration of UX-less UX.
Yeah, and I just like if I got to a point with that cat and there was a cliffhanger and it was like, well, the game isn't done yet, I would be like, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah. I think
need
But
to know
that
if
would
this
make for
cat's
a
gonna be
really
okay. Like,
that would make for
Yeah.
a really solid hook, though. You
I don't
would
know. I don't
It
know.
does.
I could barely finish a TV series that's finished, let alone a game. And if I know the game isn't, if the story isn't finished yet, I'm
Yeah.
going to be like, damn, I'm just going to wait. That's what I
Stories
did
are
for Baldur's Gate
very
3, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, stories are very difficult to do
Yeah.
early testing on. I mean, anything that's got a beginning, middle, and end. I mean, if you even things like the way The Walking Dead Series 1 worked, where they were trying to do episodic content, they struggled and ended up reverting that back to being purchasable, and they couldn't replicate that model in other games either. And obviously, there are other issues that happened in that team later down the line, which we don't need to go into. But the point for me was more that I don't think we've really worked out how you can, well, to live service a single narrative experience is very difficult.
Mm.
To use narrative in long-term engaging games is very doable. I don't want to conflate the two, if that makes sense. They are different beasts. But I think there's another aspect to early access I want to explore, which is its role in marketing, its role in setting up. Because at the moment, some of the biggest problems we have is the algorithms are not very friendly anymore to building new communities. The ability to identify and find an audience, incredibly complicated, especially with the scale of games. For example, we launched a cozy game where there were 15 cozy games launched in the same week. That's a nightmare. So, what role do you think?
That's despite the appetite, right? Because the appetite for those is huge.
Yeah. I would like to sort of explore kind of what you guys think in terms of what is the not testing role, but the marketing role of an early access.
I mean, it can certainly get people excited. And again, if it's in the right place, then people are people are seeing like, actual gameplay and then like getting to, experience that. Then, they could definitely drive the excitement. Again, you always just have that little bit of risk of, oh, is it going to run smoothly? And, is it going to,
You
do the
can't
right
release something that doesn't run
things?
smoothly. You're just asking for death.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but
It still happens, though. Yeah.
It still happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it does work out. Like, I will bring up just, at least in my mind, like, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds is like one of the like more notable examples in my time for early access. And I'm sorry, but that game just sometimes ran like complete and utter garbage. You would just like clip through the world or spin infinitely. But like then that was played as like and like thinking about marketing, spinning it, like literally spinning it into funny memes and jokes and videos, and like people, creating like their own content, posting that on YouTube, like, like they were able to kind of use at least some of that to their advantage for marketing. But for some people, it was like, actually, I can't, like, this is unplayable. Maybe I'll come back. Maybe I won't.
Yeah. And you probably burnt someone at that point. So, I mean, for me, I think this is absolutely a critical part of it. I think you can't, for me, I don't want to separate the testing value from the community building, marketing preparation value. I think it's the opportunity where when you do decide to introduce your pricing, you have the opportunity to really kind of wow people. The trouble is when I encounter a game, whether we're consulting or trying to support it in other ways, quite often someone's gone out and they put a $19.99 price or a $12.99 price on it. Something which they haven't thought about what pricing strategy they're going for. They've chucked a price on thinking whatever, without understanding that price does more than just have a value. It says something about quality. It says something about what the intention of the game is. And also quite often on games that really need to be ongoing revenue. If you've got massive server costs, like if you're running any kind of real multiplayer and you're not thinking about long-term revenue, you're really in trouble, especially if you put that up in early, because converting someone from a pay up front game into a free-to-play later, absolute nightmare. And by the way, I don't want to make people think I'm overly biased with free-to-play. I am, but I don't want you to think that necessarily, because I think there's some more subtle things going on with what my intention with this is, which is there are ways of packaging sensible ongoing pricing that is desirable and interesting, as long as you focus on what players actually care about. We've had so many bad actors, and the opportunity, I think, when you're in that early access, to find out what is the right approach, what do the players actually want. That to me is massively important. And then converting it and asking them, engaging with them, and saying, if we package it like this, is that reasonable? Is that fair? Can you see how that's supporting the game ongoing? And I think having that honest relationship, I don't want to be, you don't want to be too honest. I don't mean this in we're not trying to deceive anyone, but there's a level of information that as a developer is our domain. And if we burden the players with all the nuance, the information gets lost. And so I don't mean we're hiding things from people, but just who cares? If you're a general player, why would you care about the nuanced challenges of how much it costs to buy ramen noodles for the development team? Anyway, you know where I'm going.
Like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, how do you do? I mean, do you think about that when you're looking at early access?
About pricing, it depends. Like from a developer perspective, very differently from a player perspective. And I guess as a player who can look behind the curtain, or has access to behind the curtain on a daily basis, I mean, there's also like almost all indies underprice themselves, right? So I don't think I ever particularly look at a game in early access and go, wow. Well, normally I do, but in a completely reason. I think it's difficult for me. I really don't see us, my studio, doing early access. But then as part of a marketing plan, I hadn't really considered that much. So maybe there is like a whole other avenue. Yeah,
at least like in terms of pricing, I think it goes a lot to what Oscar was saying. Just thinking, again, just making informed decisions and being strategic about it. Like, what are you offering? Like at the stage that you're out of development, like how does that compare to other games that are on the market that have also gone into early access? Do you think you can, price it, higher, lower, whatever, and just have like a conversation, with your marketing lead or your devs or yourself if you're doing it yourself, and just like really have a good think about it, and do just a little bit of digging to see what can be done.
So, I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things, like I say, when we've had to help rescue some teams, some examples are things like where they've gone in with a price. So how do I help convert them into something more packageable that's ongoing? Typically, this is a battle pass, but I don't mean battle pass in the sort of bad practice that we've seen. I mean more in the more you play, the more you get. And if you happen to pay, you can get everything if you do everything. If you don't, you can get anything, but you'll have to be selective. So, proper value not being, blocking, no pay to win, nothing like that.
Yeah.
And having that so it's a seasonal update, so everybody gets something special, and there are good techniques to do that so it's manageable through configuration and sort of smart use of asset development without making it impossible to manage as a team. Now, in doing that, what we sat down with the players with, and we came up with a proposal where we went, right, what if those of you bought the game, we're going to have to move to this anyway, so we're going to give you 12 months of the game's value plus, so you're going to get every battle pass, each one of which we're aiming to have in at least half, possibly the same value that you paid up front. We're going to give you 12 months of that, plus we're going to give you a permanent 20% discount on everything. So that would mean that we could sell you this battle pass, blah, 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 blah. Plus, there might be seasonal content and special premium items that we would have, like any other game might have. And they would always have more value because, frankly, those guys invested in us early. We want to make them feel special. We gave them special outfits that were only ever available to founders. We gave them special tags in Discord. We literally came up with everything we could give them that wouldn't break the bank, so that they could feel like they were gods. They were the kings. They were the people that really, and they had access to the section in Discord so that they could actually talk to the devs directly. And that made, I think that worked because it made those players feel special. But that's a tough job. So if you can avoid having to do that, great. But even if you can avoid doing it, that opportunity as you go through level, assuming you can get through your early access as rapidly as possible, and I think a year, 2 years is not unreasonable, but longer than that, it's very hard to survive through. But if you can get to that later stage and you're ready to go, and you can get those people who've shown interest in being in your early access to commit to spending, that's an indicator that you've got something good that other people are going to want to buy. And I think it's an important part to get people on board and say, look, we've been making this game, we're going to be charging for it. Is it worth it to you to hand over that money? And by the way, if you do, we're going to give you extra because you've been supporting us so much. And I think if you fail to really give them that extra value, you're never going to make the game work. You need that kickoff, that excitement, and for those people to feel special on day one, so we can get that marketing halo effect Stuart was talking about earlier.
Yeah, it's also how you build and develop your super fans, right?
Yeah, exactly. We need the super fans, and who's not going to be more likely to be a super fan than a person who's joined you for early access?
Yeah. Yeah, there's
like
always
I
a bit
spend
of people
far
go,
too much
I
time
was there
thinking
that
about
day.
this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it bears thinking about, right? Because something, something like that does, lend itself to, community creation and marketing, and like real like grassroots approach. And then they're also more invested in, providing you with feedbacks. They're like, hey, you're like, for providing me with things that I like I can, help you out with that.
And we're
as well,
better to build hype than having a space, early access, for getting that streamer, the micro streamers, the larger streamers, to get them excited about the game, getting them sharing about the game, getting them to bring their friends into the game, their audience into the game. If you're going to build that momentum, surely we have to use something like early access to make that work.
Yeah.
So we are nearly out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw the room open to Laura. What I'm after is, what's the hot take that you have? What's that kind of lesson from our conversation, from the discussion we've had? What do you think people should walk away from this podcast thinking as a game developer?
Well, my favorite phrase is "it depends."
Shocker.
But I know the considered researcher. No, but I do think that early access can be a really wonderful tool. To give you a little extra runway, and to try out, if you're still trying out like some new things or trying to figure out like you have most of like the future direction nailed, but still like wanting to kind of hone it in, then, early access could work out. However, I do think there needs to be more consideration when it comes to like setting player expectations and messaging. Because again, there are just some people, like a lot of people who have been burned, unfortunately, and people who just won't even consider early access. And yeah, so I think it's, one does not simply go into early access. It's something that should really be considered. And if it's going to work for, your genre of game as well.
Thank you, Stuart.
Too many things. I think if anything, the thing that I'm definitely taking away from it is the thing that I hadn't considered all that much, which is using it for that marketing power, using it to help develop those super fans. I mean, I consider super fans all the time. I'm always thinking about like building up that mailing list, preparing for a Discord community, making sure that we have players that get like those early fans. That maybe, I mean, for us, I've been looking at how we would have them be early playtesters or whatever, but yeah, early access actually for that scenario makes perfect sense. And even thinking about it, that would be a perfect time for you to hand out a lot of access to influencers online.
Have some keys.
Yeah, I'm now thinking more and more about it as a superpower.
Good.
So
that's the
your
job.
take.
That's what we're doing. Yay.
Yeah.
So I'll throw some things in. So I think for me, I still believe do it as early as possible, but with the caveats, as Laura said, it depends. Is a very important thing. Context is everything. First thing is you've got to have a complete enough experience that's representative of the direction you're going. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. In fact, it should not be the whole thing, I would argue, because you want to show how you're evolving the game, or that audience you're recruiting won't see the game evolving in a way that's meaningful to them. But you've got to make sure that everything you release doesn't break. Because if your ratings drop, if your review score drops, you're dead. That's just it. You're dead. So speed matters. Making sure that you've got your plans together so you can test and update. But you're going to have failed tests. That's okay. As long as you're there, you're communicating, you're active, you're responding, you're actively communicating when somebody says, I've got a problem. Here, there you go, we're going to solve it. And you demonstrate that your team is ready and active. But to do that, you have to treat the game as if it is live, as if you have launched it. In fact, you basically have. And that means you get to test your deployment processes. That means you get to test your marketing strategies. You get to test your community management. You get to test your problem management. You get to test the ongoing deployment process, which is basically the heart of live ops. So there is so much to gain from using early access, but you don't have forever. You've got to do it fast. And you have to always remember the absolute importance of two of the Mythbusters themes, which I seem to say every time I talk on anything. First one being failure is always an option. And the second thing, the only difference between science and screwing around is writing things down.
Nice.
That's
Perfect.
my hot take on early access. Guys, thank you very much. Do you have any last minute thoughts?
Be ready. Just be ready if you're going to do. I mean that stands for almost any thing.
Be ready, but take risks. It's okay to take risks, but you have to be careful and know what those risks are.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, on that note, I will say thank you very much. So thank you, Laura. If people want to find out more about you or get more information, what's the social media access point of choice for you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at LJ Donahue. I'm there hanging out.
It's amazing how LinkedIn's become more and more used. Stuart, what's the social media handle of choice for yourself?
Yeah, at Stuart DeVille everywhere, but LinkedIn is where I live now. So.
Great. I am Googleable, but I'm also at Athanasius, which is a old role-playing game character. That's why I've chosen a Twitter and various other sorry, I should say X now, shouldn't I? I can't bring myself to. It just can't do it.
No, we don't need to.
I'm basically everywhere as Athanasius. You can find me almost everywhere, and I am also currently working on a real play improv podcast based in space called Anything Can Happen. On that note, this has been your Game Dev London podcast. We have been, Game Dev Local. I'm going back to my old habits of saying London. Game Dev Local podcast. We've been doing our hot take on early access. Hope you found that useful. If you did, please like, subscribe, share, tell everybody about it. If you didn't like it, tell me. I'll happily help make sure that we do the next one even better. Thank you very much. And don't forget the Discord. There's lots of people in this community who are actively engaged with talking about the things that we love, the delight of making games. And on that note, all right, Stuart, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, guys.